hear from that side. I'm not hearing you well. I think Chandra, you can take over. Some problem with my connectivity. We can start the seminar and let the presentation start.
Okay.
Chandra.
So yeah. So today, Mr. Basit will present his ongoing work. It's regarding aspiration and how it is creating unemployment or having some role on unemployment. Okay, so over to you, Mr. Basit. And just for your information, you most probably know that it will be a 45-minute approximately long presentation after some question and answer. And and after the presentation, everyone can ask him directly or write in the chat box. Okay, so over to you, Basit.
So, am I audible, sir?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you see my slides, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. The title of our paper is Relative Occupational Aspirations and Youth Unemployment in India. First, I'll give the outline of my whole presentation. I'll start with introduction, then I'll give some brief literature on aspiration and its relation of aspiration mismatch with unemployment. Then we'll talk about the measure that we have built on relative occupational aspiration mismatch. Then it will be followed by looking at relative occupational aspiration among different groups of youth. Then we will use model to look at the determination of unemployment, focusing on relative occupational aspiration gap. Then we'll conclude. So India is one of the few young countries. The average median age of Indian population is 29 years old, and according to National Youth Policy 2014, youth aged between 15 to 19 constitute 20% population. Employment. Rather, it was considered that India has a problem of low quality of employment because historically unemployment rates would be low and stable in India. However, recently unemployment, which is mainly concentrated among youth, has shown a significant increase. This is particularly since PLFS 2017-18. In the Indian case, the unemployment is a little different from how it is in Europe or other developed countries. Educated youth in India are more likely to be unemployed than uneducated, while as in Europe, it's other way around. This we are showing using PLFS 2018-19 also for youth. Youth who are more educated have higher unemployment than those who are low educated. Now, in the literature, there are different factors that talk about why there is high unemployment, rising unemployment. Jobless growth, particularly since 1991 reforms, is considered as one of the key factors for rising unemployment. There's also a strand of literature that say that unemployment in India, it's actually phenomenon of educated youth who belong to relatively well-off households, as they are waiting for the jobs in modern sector. Poor, uneducated youth, they cannot afford to be unemployed. Also, low employability among educated youth is also considered as one of the main concerns that cause unemployment among youth. But there is an often discussed but less researched dimension, that is aspirations associated with jobs and the voluntary unemployment that's caused by this mismatch between the employment aspirations and their realization. So it will be this aspect, this dimension that we will focus in our paper. Now let's see what shapes aspiration. Before going into what shapes aspiration, let's see what are aspirations. We have taken the definition from ILO 2020 paper, which says that aspirations capture the personal desires of individuals, their beliefs about the opportunity in society, and their expectations about what can be achieved through their own effort. So aspiration is not just the personal desires of an individual. Rather, aspiration capture also the beliefs about the opportunities that a person sees are available for him or her, and the expectations, whether those opportunities can be achieved through a person's effort. So all these things, desires, beliefs about opportunities, and the expectations, they combinedly capture the aspirations. Appadurai, an anthropologist Appadurai and economist Devraj Ray, they have done a substantial research on what shapes aspirations and how aspirations affect the lives of individuals. The basic premise of both of their research is that aspirations are not formed out of vacuum. Rather, aspirations of an individual are formed in a particular social context in which a person lives. So as such, aspirations are not evenly distributed in a society. It's unevenly distributed. Appadurai, who gives the socially determined phenomenon of aspiration, he defines aspiration as capability. That is, the ability of a person to navigate his or her social life and align the preferences in accordance with the circumstances in which a person is born. For example, a rich person will have higher capacity to aspire than a poor person. Similarly, Ray develops the concept of aspirations window. The aspiration window of a person will be populated by those people around the individual who are similar to him or her spatially, economically, and socially, and whose outcomes they find achievable. So the people in my aspiration window will be the ones who will determine my aspiration, because individuals view the possibilities for themselves within the social sphere through the same aspirations window. Jennicut and Ray paper 2017, they further explain the aspirations window. They say that population consists of several groups, and the factors like occupation, caste, religion, geography, income distribution, they all form the aspiration window of a person. Other literature that also talks about that socioeconomic conditions of a person and the social network of a person, they also influence the aspirations. Now, since we are concerned about aspirations, mismatch, and unemployment, we are giving some literature about how aspiration, mismatch, and unemployment are related. Ray gives the concept that it's not actually the aspirations per se that matter or that affects the behavior of an individual. It's the aspiration gap that actually affects the behavior of an individual, and that actually motivates a person to put in some effort to realize those aspirations. Aspiration gap is the distance or the gap between the current position of a person and where he or she aspires to be. So if the gap is large, a person will put in more effort to bridge that gap and match those aspirations. Talking about employment related aspirations, we know that education raises the expectations and aspirations in youth. So if the employment opportunities are not available in the market that match a person's aspirations, a person will spend some time making more efforts to meet those aspirations. So in that process, a person will be unemployed for some time. Thus, if there are misalignment between employment preferences and opportunities, that will make the job search harder for people. Luxury unemployment theory also explains this aspiration, mismatch, and unemployment. This was a theory developed in late 70s to explain the unemployment phenomenon in developing countries, because unemployment in developing countries is different from how it is in developed countries. So the common characteristics in developing countries are that unemployed are youth, they are relatively well educated, and they are those who are economically dependent on other family members. As such, a person will be unemployed for some time while he or she is looking for a desired, aspired employment. So Tenjo says that this aspiration mismatch between with respect to existing jobs or higher wages, they are responsible for a significant proportion of unemployed youth in developing countries. Now, coming to India, their 2019 study is based on survey of more than 6,000 young respondents who are aged between 15 to 34. They find that overwhelming majority of Indian youth aspire for a job in government sector. This is particularly high in rural India, and this preference increases with increase in education level. But since government has a very limited jobs to offer, people spend time preparing for government jobs as unemployed. similar observation is found in Main's 2012 paper about Ethiopia. OECD 2017 paper is based on school to transition, work transition surveys, and ILO's employment projection in 32 developing countries. It finds that 60% of students aspiring to work in high-skilled occupation, they are unlikely to fulfill their aspirations, because in developing countries, very less number of high-skilled jobs are available as compared to the people who are aspiring for these jobs. Now, we come to the measuring part of relative occupational aspirations. Before we measure the relative occupational aspirations, we want to acknowledge this at the outset, that aspiration is a qualitative concept. It's very much individualistic, it's perception based, and when we try to quantify it, it has its own risks. But we are still trying to quantify it, not for the sake of quantifying it, but because it's a social problem. Unemployment is a social problem, and we want to analyze whether mismatch between aspirations and jobs available is there. So we want to analyze this social problem from the context of aspirations mismatch. We hypothesize that relative occupational aspiration mismatch and unemployment are related. Now, before going into the measure, we want to say what is the intuition actually. We want to spend a minute on it, on the intuition behind our measuring, how we measure our relative occupational aspiration mismatch. We say that aspirations are partially exogenous, they are not completely individualistic. We are assuming that one's aspirations are a product of a particular socio-economic setup a person is in. So the achievements of the people who are in the same particular setup and who a person can relate to socially, economically, and spatially, they shape one's own expectations. So it's these expectations, when they are not fulfilled, they will cause people to be unemployed. All the whims, fancies, and desires of a person, they will not cause a person to be unemployed. But it will be those expectations that come from within a particular socio-economic context. So what we do is, we will identify the people who are living in a similar socio-economic context. After that, we will see how far are that person's expectations from the average achievement of that group. That we will call person's relative occupational aspiration gap, because since the people's achievements in our case will be occupation or the employment level, so we will say how far are that person's expectations away from the average achievement or the average occupation of that group of people. They will form a person's relative occupational aspiration gap. Now, coming to building the measure, we are using PLFS 2018-19. It's a large-scale nationally representative data. It's the latest labor force data which we have before COVID, and there are no direct questions asked in a survey on aspirations. So, as we just talked, that we will identify people based on similar socio-economic context. For that, we have used 5 variables: gender, sector, rural, urban, district, social group, and income quintile. So based on these 5 variables, we will make cohorts of people. So a person, a woman, rich woman, a rich female youth from upper caste living in an urban area in a particular district, all these women will form one cohort. Similarly, based on other characteristics, people will form different cohorts. Now, coming to employment related aspirations, which our main focus is, we know that education has the double effect. It increases aspirations of a people and it increases opportunities also in the labor market. So we'll use occupation level and education level to measure job related aspiration. For occupation level, we use NCO 2004 one-digit classification that's based on skill levels. We are using it in the increasing order of 1 to 9. Similarly, education level as given in data, it's from 1 to 13, like 1 is for illiterate and 13 is for those who have completed post-graduation. But since range of both of them is different, so we standardize both from 0 to 1. How we'll do that? We divide occupation of a person by 9 and education level of a person by 13. Now, we calculate mean education level and mean occupation skill level for each of this cohort. That's format of gender, sector, district, social, income. Now, we have the average education level of a cohort. We have the average occupation level of the cohort. Given the characteristics of the cohort, average education level has led to average occupation level in a cohort. This gives a person sense of opportunities that are available for a person. A person will form his own expected level of occupation based on this sense of opportunities. That is from average occupation level and average education level in a cohort. So unemployed people who do not have any occupation skill level, their occupation, which we assign them based on what we think they will be expecting or aspiring, is equal to O bar, that is mean occupation level, into the person's own education level divided by education level of the group. That means a person's expired or expected occupation level depends on the average occupation level of the group, average education level of the group, and the person's own education level. So for example, I belong to a cohort that has the average education level of graduation, and their average occupation level is clerk. Since if I am a postgraduate, I will expect that I should get a job higher than clerk. If I am only higher secondary educated, so I will expect that I will get a job lower than clerk. How much? Now, since we are concerned about the gap, the aspiration gap, how this gap will be deviation from the mean occupation level. What is my own occupation level? How far is it? How far is it from the mean occupation level of my own group? That will be my relative occupational aspiration gap. This gap is the distance between aspired occupation level and average occupation level in the cohort. It gives the extent of over aspiration and under aspiration. If the gap is positive, a person is over aspired. If the gap is negative, a person is under aspired. But we have to remember here that our whole aspiration thing, this over aspiration or under aspiration or occupational aspiration gap, it's a relative measure, because a person is over aspired or under aspired relative to the average occupation of the cohort. That's why our measure is, we have named it relative occupational aspiration. It's always the gap relative to something. That something is here average occupation of the group. Now, giving an example which I just mentioned, if a person has education level of 12, he's a graduate, he belongs to a cohort that has an mean education level this and mean occupation level this, how will we calculate it? So a person who will have 0.74 level of aspired occupation, the gap will be 0.74 minus 0.6. That means he has the over aspiration level of 0.14. Our relative occupational aspiration gap, it ranges from -1 to +1. Now, we have plotted the graph of relative occupational aspiration gap among youth versus adults. Youth are those who are aged between 15 to 29, and adults in this case are those who are aged greater than 29 years old up to 65 years old. So what we find is, here is this, in youth case, the graph is skewed towards right. That means the extent of over aspiration is higher among youth, or youth has a higher positive relative occupational aspiration gap as compared to adults. Plotting it for males and females, we find that this is now it is skewed towards right, more for females than males. So we say that females have higher relative occupational aspiration gap compared to males, or the extent of over aspiration is higher among females. Now we categorize our relative occupational aspiration gap by the levels. We just said that our range is from -1 to +1. If it is less than 0, that means for those who have occupation or for those who do not have occupation, their actual or aspired occupation level is lower than average occupation level. That means they are under aspired or underachievers. These under aspired or underachievers who have relative occupation gap of less than 0, we gave them a level of 0, and higher than 0, who they are over aspired, we made 5 categories of them in an increasing order based on the gap of aspired occupation level from the average occupation level. When it's from 0 to -1, it's we gave it a level 1, -0.1 to 0.2 level 2, 0.2 to 3 level 3. Similarly, 0.4 to greater than 0.4, we gave it a level 5. looking at percentage of youth by levels of ROAG, relative occupational aspiration gap, we find that 33% of males are underaspired or underachievers. And this number is just 17.87% female. Coming to a fifth level, that's the top level of aspiration gap. Again, females now have a higher percentage in this category. That means, again, the females have higher extent of over aspiration as compared to males. Now, since we had 5 variables which we used for the cohort identification: gender, sector, social group, income, and district. Now, we will remove gender from the cohort identification. Here we assume that, let's say, gender does not matter in the occupational aspiration of an individual. Now, a male person will form his occupational aspiration based on the occupational achievements of females also. Similarly, females will form the occupational aspiration based on the male's occupational achievements in her own cohort. So both females and males will now be can now be in one cohort. So what difference we find? In 0, when people were, which means people are underaspired or underachievers, it was 17.8% for females. Now it increased to 20.05. Similarly, for the 5th level, which is 15.8% of females were 5th level over aspired. Now it goes down to 7.9 only. So when gender is taken out of the cohort identification, then extent of relative under aspiration or underachievers increases for females. Females feel more underaspired or underachievers as compared to what they found when they were competing within their own gender, and it decreases for male youth. So the extent of relative over aspiration for females now declines. Now, when all the 5 variables were put as the factors for the cohort identification, we found that ST had the highest percentage of underaspired or underachievers youth. Now, again, we will do the same exercise, but this time we will take caste out of the cohort identification. We assume that caste does not matter. Does not matter in shaping a person's occupational aspirations. A general caste person will now look at the people from other castes also, the employment related achievements of other caste people also, to shape or to form his own expectation about employment. Similarly, a youth from scheduled caste will now look at youth from general caste also to form his own occupational aspirations. Now what happens? The general caste had 26.9% underachievers or underaspired. Now when caste is taken out, their underachievers or underaspired comes down, and this it increases for scheduled castes now. So without caste, now general and OBC have the higher percentage who are overaspired, and SCs are now most underaspired and underachievers. Now again, we'll take both income and caste now out. So this difference becomes more stark when we take income and caste both out. These both tables, when we took gender out or we took caste, income group out, they reinforce or they justify our basis of keeping these variables for the cohort identification. So we say that all these variables matter for a person's expectation about the occupation or aspiration of an occupation. Now we show the graph of relative occupational aspiration gap by different educational categories. So this is the this is underaspired or underachievers, and this is the 5th level over aspiration gap. This is very low for those who are just educated up to primary level, and this goes up to this level for tertiary educated people. And this underaspired or underachievers, this declines for tertiary educated. That means there is higher gap between career aspirations and reality of labor market for tertiary educated youth. Again, it's in line with the OECD report 2017 that said that high skilled employment sectors that result, it's actually the smaller high-skilled employment sectors that create less number of high-skilled jobs, that is responsible for the gaps between career aspirations and jobs available for youth. Now, our main topic, our main thing, which is to see the relationship between unemployment rate and the relative occupational aspiration gap. We show it here in this table for males and females separately. So 0 is the lowest, 0 is the under aspired youth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's the increasing level of over aspiration gap. We see for both males and females, with increase in ROAG, unemployment rate increases. But here on the 5th level, females and males behave differently. For males, if the occupational aspiration gap is too large, their unemployment rate decreases. But for females, it keeps on increasing. So when the gap is large, maybe male youth take up any job, any available job that is available. But for females, they still they don't take up the job and they are still unemployed. Now, to look at how different factors, particularly related to occupational aspiration gap, determine youth unemployment in India, we use probit regression to see how different factors influence the probability of labor market outcome. We are using 3 discrete outcomes in our study in multinomial probit model, that is employed, unemployed, and inactive. Unemployed are those who are not employed but are seeking work. Inactive are those who are not in employment. They are not in education also, but they are not seeking work. They are mostly mainly in domestic activities. So we are using multinomial probit model. Why are we using multinomial probit model and not the multinomial logic model? Because there is this independence of irrelevant alternatives restriction that is built into multinomial logic model. This restriction is relaxed in multinomial probit model. This property says that probability of one outcome that a variable takes should be independent of other alternatives available. That means in our case, probability of a person to be unemployed, it should be independent of a person to be inactive or employed. But we say that if the labor market prospect is very grim for people, they will simply stop looking for employment and they will just withdraw themselves from labor market. So that's when they turn inactive because of the poor labor market prospect. So we say that our outcome variable is not independent of each other. So we use multinomial probit model, but we will remove these inactive people from our size, and then we will have only 2 outcomes, employed and unemployed. At that point of time, we will use binomial probit model. It will be used for only those who are in labor force. The equation for multinomial probit model is this. We have the dependent variable, which takes the 3 alternatives. 1 is employed, 2 unemployed, and 3 inactive. We have kept the base category as employed. So we are using different independent variables to control our model, to control our results for related occupational aspiration gap. We use gender, educational level, age, marital status, vocational training, household size, MPC, religion, social group, and we also use sector, and we control the state level variations also. In case of binomial probit, we use all these variables, but our dependent variable takes that time 1 unemployed or 0 that's employed. These are the results. We are showing only our marginal effects results from both multinomial probit model and binomial probit model. If we look at relative occupational aspiration gap, it has a negative effect on the employment status, it has a positive effect on unemployment status, and it has a positive effect on inactive status of youth. So that means higher relative occupational aspiration of a person is less likely to be employed, more likely to be unemployed, and also more likely to be inactive. Similarly, binomial probit model also shows the positive and significant effect for unemployment. Other variables that we have controlled, like vocational training, if a person has received vocational training, he has higher chances to be employed. Similarly, marital status, social group, religion, These all we are not discussing here. Now, given that males and females behave differently in a labor market and different variables do not have the same effect on both of these groups, we have looked at marginal effects from multinomial probit model by dividing the sample into males and females separately. So what we find in this case also is ROAG has a negative and significant effect on employment status. For unemployment it has a positive and significant, and for inactive also it has positive, but it's very low. Similarly, for females, unemployed are the same, but for inactive status it has positive but very high effect. So we say that for males, higher relative occupational aspiration gap leads to unemployment, but in females it leads to both. It leads to a female's unemployment probability, and it also leads to her higher probability of withdrawing from labor market and becoming inactive. We have control for other variables like marital status. For example, married male is more likely to be employed, but a married female has a higher chance. This effect is stronger to be inactive. So maybe because a person getting a male getting married, he has since he is considered as a principal income earner, so he joins he takes any employment, and females, due to child care responsibilities and other reasons, their probability of inactivity increases. So similarly, we have other variables also, the results of other variables. Now, checking for males versus females by using binomial probit model. This time we are keeping the sample size of only those who are employed and who are unemployed, those only who are in labor force. Relative occupational aspiration gap has the positive effect for both, and the effect is stronger for females. This is again in line with our earlier results when we showed that females, relative occupational aspiration gap causes higher unemployment among females than males. Now, we now divided our sample into those who are educated up to higher secondary level and those who are educated above higher secondary level to see whether the effect of relative occupational aspiration gap is different. We found that for both of them it's positive, but for youth above higher secondary level educated, it's much higher than those who are educated up to higher secondary level. That means that the career-related aspirations mismatch exists more for tertiary educated youth, and it leads to higher unemployment among higher educated youth. Coming to conclusion, we found that existing jobs do not match actually the employment aspirations of youth, and it's this gap between the aspirations and the available employment that could be partly responsible for the growing unemployment. So this misalignment or the gap between employment aspiration and the reality of labor market, it persists mainly among tertiary educated youth. So this whole talk about skill mismatch, that's it's the main factor that's responsible for youth being unemployed. We are not saying that skilling is not important. Skilling is important, but our paper says that addressing the aspirations is equally important. So an effective policy approach could be the focus on creation of better quality jobs that match the aspiration of young educated labor force, so that their aspiration mismatch could be addressed, and as such the unemployment could become lower. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Basit. Okay, so anybody has any question? You can either chat or you can just directly ask him. Basit, I have just one question that what your findings are suggesting that due to aspirations, people are becoming unemployed. But suppose after they remain unemployed for some time, after that, what is happening? Are they getting the job they desire for, or their aspirations are becoming down, or they are just becoming inactive? Do you have any sort of finding from your paper?
Actually, sir, yeah, this is an interesting question. We actually, that's why we are focusing on youth. So as we said in our presentation also, that youth are the ones who can afford to be unemployed for some time. So people are remaining unemployed till they can afford, and till they find the jobs which they are aspiring for. But yeah, like we said, marriage had a different impact. So a person getting married, so he will take up any job that's available. So this is, there are different factors also that are important here. But yeah, we are saying that aspirations is partly responsible. Maybe some people find the jobs that they aspire for, and some people simply take up the employment, whatever they can lay hands on, because of different reasons.
Okay, and just another question that you have talked about that the effect is higher for tertiary education, but between that group, can you divide? I mean, whether it is post graduation or whether it is undergraduation. I mean, do you have these kind of differences? I mean, subcategories.
So we have not looked into the subcategories, but as of now, we have just looked at three broad categories till primary, from primary to higher secondary, and above higher secondary. They include graduates, postgraduates, and above. So we have looked broadly at these three groups only. So maybe we can look further down at further disaggregated level.
Yeah, and you can, if possible, I don't know whether the data will permit it or not, but you can also look at for what kind of education, and whether it's for engineering or management, or some kind of normal graduation, for which kind of education it is, the effect may be more stronger. So that you can check if you want to. Yeah, so anyone else, any other question?
And Basit, I'm Harilal. I'm sorry I missed some parts of your presentation because of connectivity problem, but I could listen to at least 75% of it. I like this paper because it helps you dissect the problem of unemployment. Generally these are two categories, aggregate categories: employment and unemployment. That way, generally they appear to be as two black boxes. You don't know the composition of employment, you don't know the composition of unemployment also. Structural features of these two aggregates are very interesting, and it's not very easy to get into those structural features. And you are opening up these black boxes, these aggregates, and you are getting into finer, interesting structural details of both unemployment and employment. That way, the paper is very interesting, and it is taking us to some important policy questions. I appreciate this, but I have a question. See, forget about structure. Now, there are certain kind of macroeconomic long-term trends in an economy, like economy is underperforming, unemployment is high, growth is not booming, very low growth rates. Now, unemployment is is a major problem, and it's a sustained problem. Under such situation, both your, the variables that determine aspirations, they will go down, because now in your cohort, in your group, in your geography, in the locality, people are all unemployed, or unemployment level is very high. And probably educational attainments, skill attainments will also be low. So the aspiration gap will generally go down across different groups, across geographical areas. I'm asking this question because in the context of India and in the context of many developing countries, these aggregate factors which affect economy in general, socio-economic groups in general, that they can be very, very important. Can you sort of respond to this, or am I making sense?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, I got the point. I think, sir, this is we are not negating other factors like jobless growth or skill mismatch. They are not responsible. We are saying that this dimension is being talked about, but it was not empirically. It's not empirically examined. So we have made an attempt in that direction. Now, coming to your point, sir, that when the aggregate things go wrong in the economy, then I think this is in line with our findings also, that we are saying a person's aspirations are formed within a particular socio-economic context. So if things go wrong in that particular socio-economic context, they will affect a person's own aspiration as well. For example, if in a person's own cohort, people are not high skilled employed, so a person's aspirations will eventually come down. So similarly, a reverse thing can happen. So, sir, I think, I think our paper also is on the similar lines. And
yeah, okay, I'll add a general comment. See, if you take unemployment rates across Indian states, considerable variation among states will be there. It's there. And Kerala generally appears to be on the higher side when it comes to unemployment. Now, I think your paper will help us answer that. Why unemployment rates appears to be so high in Kerala? Is it a question of appearance also? Because in many states where unemployment rate is low, in fact, people are not getting into government employment or organized sector employment. Even in the unorganized sector, employment will be difficult. But no, they are not in the job market. They are not any more seekers. They continue to be underemployed, and okay, they don't register as unemployed. They don't themselves treat as unemployed because they are out of the labor force. But in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, and many other states, people are aspiring. They want to get into government jobs or organized sector jobs or better jobs. So they are always in the labor market trying for jobs. So how you sort of explain this kind of interstate variation? Will your model be of some use in explaining this observed patterns?
So, sir, actually, in our model, we have controlled for the state level variations. But the point, sir, you are making is interesting in the sense that, sir, again, it comes to the initial point that we said that unemployment is actually it's about affordability. So uneducated, or they most probably happen to be poor also. So they cannot afford to be unemployed. They just take up any employment, whatever is there. So that's why we see unemployment much lower among low educated categories. So, but sir, yeah, Kerala being an high educated state, and in terms of per capita income also, it's richer. So people can afford to be unemployed. So it's in line with the larger trend of higher education and higher unemployment. But yeah, higher education leads to higher aspirations as well. So when there are higher aspirations, there are more chances of higher aspiration mismatch also. So so I think, sir, it's in broad in the same lines.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add, it's Vinod here. Can I just add to the comments, Chandra?
Sure.
Yeah. So I thought I'll just add on to what Basit had said. Now I think the comments that was given are quite interesting comments actually. Frankly speaking, we have not looked at these things. Basit and the rest of us have not looked into these things. That is different educational categories, what Chandra had said, and what Harlal sir had said. That is looking at the structural aspects of unemployment that needs to be attended to, right? Now the thing is that I think, but after you hearing to your comments, I think it is very much possible actually to bring in these factors and to look at these things across, bringing in educational differences across different educational categories. It is possible to look because the data allows for that. And also, what Halal sir has said, both in terms of state-wise differences also can be attempted to be explained in terms of one thing that can be thought about is that, I mean, the differences in unemployment across states, does it also match with the differences in aspirations? That is something that we can be checked across states, right? So that can be attempted to, and also over a period of time, like when you have very low growth rates in the economy, how does aspirations look like? And when with very low growth rate, usually you have high unemployment rates. And does it match with the fall in? Is it about? I mean, it could be that when there are very low growth rates, since employment options are lower, people would be taking up any job that is available, right? So their aspirations will probably have a much lesser effect because you cannot wait out at all. So these things actually can be tested. I mean, if, the core idea can be tested across time, across different time spans, across states, and also across educational categories also. Yeah, I thought I'll just add to this thing. Add to what Basu had said. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, and just one thing, Professor Vinod, I was just looking at the CMIE data for January 22. What I can see that it shows that Kerala is having 5% of unemployment rate, but Rajasthan it is having 18.9%, whereas Tripura 17.1%, which are relatively poor states.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, maybe Karnataka is having just 2.9%. So, I mean, just aspiration due to education and whether people are poor, that may not be whole story. So, I mean,
Yeah,
you
that
can also think of other channels
explanation.
also.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing, please, Chandra?
Sure.
So no, so I think in line with all the comments, we had been thinking about how to extend the paper. So what Basit, I mean, maybe we can discuss it, but what we can really try and do is to have these extensions where we, split the sample and look at what happens to our main estimation models when you have one subsample where the states which have a higher than average or median unemployment rate, I mean, what's happening in that subcategory, and the other subcategory would be states with lower unemployment rate. Similarly, another thing that we can look at was maybe with respect to household with higher income and lower income, because you did emphasize in one of your slides that it might be an income effect, because people with higher income may have the luxury to actually wait out and still not take up just any job that comes their way. And finally, the third thing that you can try is according to educational categories. I think all the three comments that have been given, all the 3 or 4 comments, can be very nicely integrated in the econometric model that we are trying to estimate. It will be very good extensions, I think. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any question, any comment?
One question. Do you have data on spells or durations of unemployment? Because this affordability to remain unemployed would affect how long one is willing to remain unemployed. So that may be a more direct.
Yes, sir. That will be an interesting thing to do, but we do not have data on duration of unemployment in PLFS. We have duration of unemployment in earlier unemployment surveys up to 68, but for the PLFS, which we have used in our data, we do not have duration of unemployment. Maybe we can analyze the same thing on that data set and see whether it has an effect on duration of unemployment as well.
And one more thing, it's more clarificatory thing. This OIs are what, like your occupation or occupation?
Yes, sir. A person's occupation, which we assign to him based on what we think he will be expecting
So
or aspiring for.
bar, which is the average occupation level, will it
Yes.
get affected by, say, the share of unemployed in the cohort?
When we take O bar, sir, we take only those who are employed. So the average will be those who are employed, the level of their occupation divided by the number of employed only. So, sir, at that point, we are keeping unemployed out.
Okay. So maybe one extension could be is to even the question that Chandril had asked in the beginning, that if this index can also take into labor market, because your aspirations are also concerned, not just about people who are what kind of employment your peers have, but also the status of your peers, how many of your peers are employed or not. If I see most of my friends are unemployed, what is the point of study?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think that can be looked into, sir.